Hello and welcome to Hotline segment 2 of day 2, part 2. I'm Lori Webb and I am your host until 3 p.m., where we will switch segments. And I come from INSPOC, which is to inspire, to inform, to motivate, and kick in the butt to get you out of your head and into action. And I do that through a variety of ways, through speaking, through writing, through creating events, and through doing crazy projects such as this, the Entrepreneur Hotline. Our goal to provide 24/7 around the clock entrepreneurship content, to be a resource, to be a support system for entrepreneurs around the world, and to provide information, to share resources that are relevant for entrepreneurs, whether you're starting out or whether you've been in the game for a while. So I hope that this information is helpful for you, and I also hope that you will be able to get a chance to listen to some of the curated content, because there's a lot that's, while we're in the course of it, we're working through it. I'm experimenting a lot, especially trying out different things. This new explore section that I decided to add basically this morning, to break up some of the content segments when there's no one who is actually actively needing coaching, or wanting to be a part of the facts, the fooks, the or otherwise known as the also ask me anything, the AMA. I say facts and fooks because they're frequently asked questions and frequently unasked questions. Colin and I addressed this earlier this morning. The reason I talk about the fooks is because, as the expert or as the person who is presenting the information, you have a typically an intimate knowledge of something that gives you insight into questions that don't get asked but should be asked. There are things that you know, and people don't know what they don't know, and therefore they don't know what to ask to get the right response. And that's very, very critical, and sometimes why people go kind of amiss of each other, because the question the question that was asked led down a rabbit hole of information that had nothing to do with what was really at the core of the asking. And because the person who didn't know what to ask, uh, are unaware of what that question should have been, it makes it difficult to get the response, and people get frustrated. Whereas when the expert can guide the questions or say, "Oh, well, actually, what you should have been asking, or what would have been more relevant for you, tell me what you really need and what you're aiming for, so that I can help you adapt the question." And if that seems a little convoluted or confusing, as an example, when you are in a position and you're working with a client, you're working with a coach, or you, conversely, if you're working with a coach or a mentee, or I'm sorry, a mentor, that asking for what you really want, or specific, not trying to frame the question, but trying to find out what you really want, is at the essence of trying of developing the question so that you can ask it in a way that people can give you the response that you are truly seeking. Not less convoluted, I think. Okay, let's try again. So, as an example, when you are designing, people are designing, they often branding, one of my areas. So if we're talking about branding, people often incorrectly think about branding, and they're thinking really purely of the superficial aspects of branding. So they're thinking of, their color schemes, and they're thinking of fonts, and um, they're thinking of maybe graphics, and they're thinking of the way they want their website to look. But these are all superficial things, and sometimes even thinking, oh, it would be great to have, people will ask you, there are people who are out there who work in branding who will say, so yeah, I would like to help you with your branding. So, what's your favorite color? And, what kind of, I'm going to just, ask you some of these questions that are superficial questions, and it might bring up some samples, but I would say I'd be wary of anyone who just wanted to launch right into what colors do you like, unless they're asking you just to kind of get a feel for you and get an idea of what the trying to get a feel for the value that you're trying to bring, the values that you have, the things that you like, the things that connect to who you are, and in terms of the brand, finding out more about the brand so you can get a deeper understanding of the brand through understanding the brander and understanding who is aiming the brandee actually, and who is going to be the recipient of this. So contextually speaking, when I'm working on branding, I have an expression called thorough branding because I'm looking to go thoroughly through this, and that is to align your your personality, who you are, with the industry that you're in, that so that you take into effect, if you take into consideration what this, what is the norm, what is the status quo, what are the good practices. That's just to know, because good practices or best practices and status quo is what's happening now, based on what was started before. So it's something that has just that has landed, but it is not innovative. It is not forward thinking. That's you would have to kind of jump to the next level. So it's good to know where you're at, and you need to know the rules of the game. You need to know. It's very helpful to have that knowledge so that you are breaking those rules with intention and not accidentally, and so that you are able to leverage that to advantage. And so when you're thinking about this branding, you want to consider, you know, the sound, the sight, the visual aspects of it, but first by tapping into the essence of the brand. What are you trying to thoroughly communicate to whom, and through through which vehicles? So what is the most natural way for you to visualize your brand, or to put it out there? For some, it's going to be better to do things through audio channels. For some, they feel comfortable on video. Video is really, really key, and everyone's like saying, do video. But if you are super uncomfortable with video, and if you have you're in you don't have a good connection, if you don't have if your sound is super super bad, so that people can't listen to it, or if you're in an environment where there's a lot of background noise, if you are in a situation where maybe something in the resonance of your voice is a bit challenging, this is all something you want to consider. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, because I'm all about authenticity, but it's also about evaluating where you're using your strengths, rather your more challenged aspects, which we all have. So also your comfort level will play a part. And that's something that you can grow into. You can get better at doing video. You can get better at doing live video. You can get better at using your voice to be better at enunciating, to be better at your pacing, to be better at using your energy levels. Yeah. to also be better at not saying and ah. There's a lot of things that you can leverage in that area in terms of back to the visual, the things that we usually associate with the brands, with branding ourselves. That is, which fonts. And for me, starting off with this quite early, back in school when we actually still did typography, when you actually used the little, you know, now I can't even think of my vocabulary for typography is actually gone out the window at this point. But when we used to actually do the typesetting, and you would set up the spacing, and you would you know figure out how to use the fonts, what they represented, where they came from, the origin of the different fonts, why we use the serif, the tail, or not serif. That's not the tail. If you look at books, so going back to books, and print material, the serif, the little tail, when you have fonts that have little tails on them, if you actually look at many of the things on the internet. So as an example, you see where it says that I'm live, that is a font with no serif, because on the screen it's often easier to read without having the tail. It's simplified. It makes it cleaner. Some would say sexier. And when you have books, the serif leads the eye, so it helps to guide you when you are reading in terms of the typeset. And this could be a longer presentation in and of itself, but to guide you in the font, in the brand category when choosing fonts. I had a like one of my favorite experiences. I was working with a client years ago, and they were working in the wellness area. Actually, they were working with meditation. They wanted to brand themselves. It was a group that we were like working through, and everyone was giving me presentations of how we had worked through this brand strategy, and we talked about branding at its core. I presented this idea of um of this thorough branding, and thank you for the thumbs up and the love. I like it. And uh this back to this presentation of the material, and this idea of wellness and meditation, and thinking, what does it evoke, and the idea of how this would manifest itself visually through a font and through colors. And for some reason, this client decided that the best way to brand this light, ethereal, spiritual, uh, I think of, I'm going like this because it's it's airy and lighter. And what she came up with, she wanted to use, I believe, a Gothic font, which is, which, if you remember Gothic, think vampire movie, thick and dark. Like, so I was saying to her, as she created this, as we were working through it, I said, okay, let's deconstruct this. Let's look at it. And can you see that everything about, like, the name that she had come up with, the font that she had used, everything about the way she was branding it was the direct opposite of what she was trying to communicate. So this origin story, this communication, this the way that it's communicated, this understanding of, a bit of the history. You don't have to go deep into it, but just to have an idea of what the different fonts represent, get a feeling for what, the background might be on it, because it can help you while you're developing, while you're thinking about what might be the appropriate font. And when you're creating like a logo, if you're going to use a font-based logo, you can, many people are just going through and then like grab the first font that hits them, and it's very basic and it's very generic. If that suits your brand, then, and you're in a hurry, I think better to do imperfect action than to obsess over it and not get it done. However, if you think a little bit more about it, even just an easy fix, if you just kern it, if you just take a basic font and then you make the spacing a little bit different, either making the spacing go closer together or making the spacing go further apart. That will add some dimension to it. And then by the use of color, by the use of whether you're going to outline it in something or have it free or have some added lines or something, that will also enhance the brand so it looks more like an actual logo. And a lot of people are with tools like Canva, which is all about democratizing design and has a plethora of templates that have been professionally designed and crowdsourced. It gives you an opportunity to really like jumpstart your branding. But before getting to that, it's really important that you do the work. It's important that you think through connecting the dots between who you are and what you want your aspirational brand to be, especially if you are branding yourself. And there are different ways to brand. If you're branding yourself versus if you're branding a small startup, or you're branding whether it's the retail, whether you're in the food industry, if you're in tech, all these things, there are some, like I said earlier, default status quo areas. There are certain things that you consider also where you're going to be placed. So, as an example, as a professional speaker, then my logo is going to go up on a lot of event sites, listing me as a partner or listing me as a contributor. And if I have, looking at, if I, as a professional, you want your logo to be able to stand beside uh, comparative brands. Uh, Also, if you're thinking savvy, you also want it to stand out. So you might even consider, that you have some options with your logo. That's the other thing, is that I would suggest that you have some color options. You also have to make sure that, those logos aren't too, some people get too fancy and it gets too intricate. And what happens is when it gets shrunk down, it gets messy and it doesn't look professional. So even if it looks great when it's this big, you have to think of how is it going to be applied, and where is it going to be seen? And to have your logo being placed in areas, um, also if you are aiming to be a player and to go beyond your solo entrepreneurship venture, not because you don't want to be more than a solo entrepreneur, but if you want to be considered, if you're aiming to be a part of events, or if you're aiming to work with partners who are more established than you, then you want your logo to stand up against those partners. You don't want to look like you're an amateur. And some of the rules about design, um, not everybody catches it. But if a person who is a designer sees it, they will see it. They will know. They will be able to more appropriately tell you why it's not right. But people who are not designers will also get a feeling, right? You get a feeling when something's off, and you might not be able to articulate it, but when it looks off, it stands out. And that is not standing out in the best way. It is standing out in a kind of irritating way. Does that make sense? Yes. So, uh, branding, I could also talk about all day. In various incarnations of my life, I have worked with branding, through audio, through sound, as a professional speaker, as a radio disc jockey, as a voiceover artist, as a public speaker and trainer. And through branding, I guess my first foray into branding was in my earlier years when I was modeling and working with brand from a fashion standpoint. How you present yourself, how you look, makeup, hair, styling, all of these things that I was, fortunate enough to work with some very, very qualified, fantastic professionals who were, good at their craft, and learning from that, and also my own personal curiosity, which continues to this day, just not in that area. I, wanted to learn the tips and tricks and become more adept at it. And so looking at branding from that perspective, personal branding, I was also a personal shopper when I lived in Paris. That was part of what I spent most of my time doing. And working as a personal shopper through Macy's New York. So personal shopping, working with different types of clients, not in a, I also, looked into like a color, like being a colorist and engaging in all that area, because that was like it connected to fashion and connected to style, personal styling, and all these things were a fascination of mine, in my earlier years. And it's not that it's not still interesting to me, but more from a entrepreneurial standpoint, more from this branding aspect. One of the elements of this thorough branding method ideology of the audio, not necessarily in this order, obviously, but the audio, the personal brand, the 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 graphical branding, which is the key branding that most people pay attention to and start investing their money in, and the aspect of beyond this these areas also, even, the way you smell, like the perfume you choose or don't choose, the way you you know the way you appear. Like, actually, this what I'm doing right now is a part of my brand, and it's not affected. It is who I am. When I was in 5th grade, there's a shout out to Brian Kelly. Actually, it was 6th grade. We did some speaking in class, and we were talking about predictions. The teacher said, okay, let's, what do you predict about, you know, the future? What do you predict about your classmates' future? Who will be doing what, where, and Brian Kelly raised his hands and he said, "I predict that Lori Webb's hands will fall off, but from using them while she talks." And I thought it's been with me ever since. I always use my hands. I'm very, very physical, and also very animated when I speak, as you probably notice. I It's a part of my personality, and it is something that, I have to own. Of course, I know technically what to do on stage also, stage experience from getting a degree in theater, and being on stage, dancing and acting and performing, singing in my earlier years. So I have an understanding of stage presence, of body positioning, also really relevant in how your personal brand is presented and interpreted. And I think it's really important to consider all of these things. Look at what you do naturally, and these things we do by default, in the same way that many people have horrendous posture because throughout the years, especially like the classic leaning into, leaning on, into the chair and slouching. It's, when you do that enough, that's what feels natural. Not, having good posture and realizing that when you have the good posture, it allows you to have, in the sense of speaking and presenting yourself and going to events, it actually gives you more stamina, because when you have good posture, everything is supported. So, when you think that if your body is, if you're slouching over, then your organs are all crunched together. That doesn't allow you to get the air that you need into your lungs. That you're not, also, I would say culturally, I don't know about the whole world, but as an American who has been living in Europe for more than half of her life, what I've noticed, especially living in Denmark, and the difference between Americans and Danes is because of the culture, because of the language, that Americans are are actually more challenged to breathe. I think that we don't breathe as well as Danes do because by nature of the language, Danes have to breathe because you can't hit the vowels that they hit unless you're using your whole, you're using your lung capacity, that you're breathing from down here, uh, expanding your belly to get the resonance to reproduce the sound, right? This is like, wow, I'm such a nerd. Uh, but Americans, we don't have to do that, and we can easily breathe here, from birth to death. If we're not in a profession where we need to leverage uh, a capacity to sustain our breathing, which is not good for our health, but most people don't actually have to deal with that. I mean, obviously the health portion, but most people don't think about it because it's not something that you need to use. And actually, contrarily, Danes don't have to think about the fact that they can do it because they have to do it. So that's a little like side cultural note that I think is a bit fascinating and nerdy, but relevant in terms of entrepreneurs going out and doing presentations, and speaking is a part of your toolbox. And we'll get into speaking a little bit later. I will personally get into speaking a little bit later because that's really one of my areas of expertise. But we also have an expert who spoke about it yesterday with Gail, Monique, sorry. And you'll be able to see that if you go through the social media feeds. Highly recommend it. It was really a good talk. I was on break of sorts, but like, kind of listening in the background and engaging a bit because I thought she brought up some very valid points and some interesting applications, ways of thinking of how you can integrate speaking into promoting your business, which is a part of your brand, or speaking as a part of your branding. I liked her approach to it, and I will get into some more practicalities about speaking from like I said, from everything from the way that you're using your voice and the way that you are crafting your messaging and the way that you are using your body language, the way that you are using your actually using technology. Which medium are you on or in? Because the way that you use your voice in an intimate conversation is different than when you are speaking to thousands of people in a crowd or tens of thousand people in a crowd. How you're using it when you have one type of mic as opposed to another type of mic. How you are when we are talking about mic technique. Also, I'm not using one because we had a snafu in the old tech department, which is also something to be aware of. I have uh, been fortunate enough, or through the years and through a lot of experience, I'm fortunate enough to be able to leverage my voice in times of tech snafus. I've been on stage in front of crowds of hundreds and hundreds of people, and where the mic wasn't really working, and I've been able to project my voice so that I could get the attention of these people and and speak. But when you're doing that, you also have to be aware of the pressure that you're putting, physical pressure that you're putting on your voice, and the um, the sustainability of doing that. So there's all kinds of tips and tricks involved in that. side, we're talking about in this segment, basically, I'm talking a lot about branding and talking about the thorough branding concept and how it breaks down into all areas of your being and how it can be translated, interpreted through the creation of your brand. And if you already have a brand, you can take a look at that. I would do an audit and go through and look to see that your platforms are aligned and comparing and contrasting them so that you can enhance them so that they serve you the best way that they as possible. That is that's basically the key elements that I wanted to address in this little segment. I am going to need to run out to the bathroom for a second and maybe a minute or so, and grab a glass of water. Speaking of the voice and and managing that and being able to sustain, your voice needs lubrication. You need water. I actually, have had some coffee today, but coffee's not great for your voice. I have not had nearly enough water, and water is also important in terms of your cognition and your ability to concentrate, because a dehydrated person is a frazzled person, not to mention a person at risk of passing out. So we don't want that. I will be back shortly. I'm putting up my back in a minute sign, and in just a less than an hour, I am going to be joined by my colleague, the wonderful Gail Gillian, and that's an exciting moment. And why? Because I love Gail, and Gail is awesome, but also because it will be the end of 6 hours of live streaming for me alone. Well, I don't know if Gail is actually paying attention. She might not have noticed this because she was sleeping, but Colin was on here for a half an hour, so that was a little bit of a cheat. That was a special because Colin, our third, the 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 third part of the trio, host trio, uh, had client work that he was committed to today that meant that he was not going to be able to be on live. So Gail and I are pulling the all-time uh, challenge of being able to live stream like a crazy couple of gals. And so far it's going pretty well. We're creating some unusual content at times, and other times more traditional content, and speaking with guests, and back to the point of this whole thing, which is to be an experimental project. It is a pilot project. It is aiming to give you the best value, to investigate what that best value could be, and most critically to give you around the clock entrepreneurship. So we are mixing it up. It is a virtual network of activity, of information, of different types of information presented in different modalities, and we find it invigorating and fun to be playing in this sandbox known as the Entrepreneur Hotline. On that note, I will be back in a second. I'm going to put myself on mute, and I will see you soon. I'm back. I'm back. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, wow. Oh, it's nice to stretch my legs. And that is important too if you're an entrepreneur. So you need to get physical, as Olivia Newton-John once said. And I think that now that I am looking at the finish line for this marathon of a entrepreneurial hosting journey that is known as the Entrepreneur Hotline, I am getting a little bit giddy. I think that we're going to try segment number 2 or 3, can't remember. We're going to go with another fable. Yay, fables! So I'm going to end this broadcast, which was largely about branding, and I am going to start a new broadcast known as the Fable Thing. So give me a minute. I'm going to be switching, and um, yeah, that's going to be the next thing. So I'm going to just go right out of this and into the next thing. I don't think you really need to be watching me. So I will say, starting soon, even though this is not starting soon. Yeah, it's misleading. Okay, I'm going to go out of this and say thank you.